Hello, everybody. I'm so glad we're together again. And we're together again to read chapters 13 and 14 of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. 12 and 13 were quite the chapter. 11 and 12 were quite the chapters, weren't they? We saw what the duffels really looked like. Funny little mushroom sort of people when they were lying on their back. People with one leg and great big huge feet that almost looked like canoes, and they could actually float on them. Interesting. And we met the magician, and then I'm so glad we got through the dark island. Ooh-wee, that when I first read this story to my children, I had never read it as a child myself, but when I first read it to my children, I could hardly get through that chapter. It scared me. The kids didn't seem to mind it so much, but boy, oh boy. Maybe it's because I've had some dreams that I would really not want to come true, and maybe you have too. But anyway, we're finished with that. Now let's read about the three sleepers, chapter 13. The wind never failed, but it grew gentler every day until at length the waves were just little ripples, and the ship glided on hour after hour, almost like it was sailing on a lake. And every night they saw that there rose in the east new constellations which no one had ever seen before in Narnia. And perhaps, Lucy thought with a mixture of joy and fear, perhaps no living eyes had ever seen them before. These new stars were big and bright, and the nights were warm. Most of them slept on deck and talked far into the night, or even hung over the ship's side, watching the luminous dance of the foam thrown up by the bows. On an evening of startling beauty, when the sunset behind them was so crimson and purple and widely spread that the sky itself seemed to have grown bigger, they came in sight of land on their starboard bow. It came slowly nearer, and the light behind them made it look as if the capes and headlands of this new country were all on fire. But presently they were sailing along the coast, and its western cape now rose up behind them, black against the red sky, and sharp as if it were cut out of cardboard. And then, when they could see better what this country was like, they could see that it had no mountains, but gentle hills with slopes like pillows. And an attractive smell came from it, what Lucy called a dim purple kind of smell, which Edmund said and Rince thought was just rot, but Caspian said, "I know what you mean." They sailed on a good way past point after point, hoping to find a nice deep harbor, but they had to content themselves in the end with a wide and shallow bay. Though it had seemed calm out at sea, there was, of course, surf breaking on the sand, and they could not bring the Dawn Treader in as closely as they would like. So they dropped anchor a good way out from the beach and had a wet and tumbling landing down into the lifeboat. Lord Roop remained on board the Dawn Treader. He did not want to see any more islands. All the time that they remained in this country, the sound of the waves breaking on the shore was in their ears. 2 men were left to guard the boat, and Caspian led the others inland, but not far, because it was too late for exploring, and the light would soon go. But there was no need to go far to find an adventure. The level valley, which lay at the head of the bay, showed no road or track or other sign of habitation. Underneath was springy grass, dotted here and there with a few low bushy growths, which Edmund and Lucy thought were heather, but Eustace, who was rather good at botany, said that it wasn't heather, but closely related to it. When they had gone less than a bowshot from the shore, Drinian said, "Look, what is that?" And everybody stopped. "Are they big trees?" said Caspian. "No, I think they're towers," said Eustace. "They might be giants," said Edmund in a lower voice. "Well, the way to find out is to go right in among them," said Reepicheep, drawing his sword and pattering off ahead of everybody else. "I think it's a ruin," said Lucy, when they had gone a good deal nearer, and her guess was the best so far. What they saw now was a wide, oblong space, flagged with smooth stones and surrounded by gray pillars, but no roof. And from end to end of it ran a long table. with a rich crimson cloth that came down nearly to the pavement. We've seen that word crimson a lot, and I have assumed, but maybe you don't know, that means a lovely rich red. With a crimson cloth on it that came nearly down to the pavement. At each side of it were many chairs made out of stone and richly carved, with silken cushions on the seats. And on the table itself there was set out such a banquet as they had never seen, not even when Peter the High King was at Cair Paravel. There were turkeys and geese and peacocks and boars' heads and sides of venison. There were pies shaped like ships under full sail, or like dragons or elephants. There were puddings made of ice cream and bright lobsters and gleaming salmon, nuts, grapes, pineapples, peaches, pomegranates, melons, and tomatoes. There were flagons of gold and silver and curiously wrought glass, and the smell of the fruit and the wine blew toward them with a promise of all happiness. "I say," said Lucy. They came nearer and nearer, but all very quietly. "Where are the guests?" said Eustace. "We could be the guests," said Rince. "Look," said Edmund sharply, and they were actually now within the pillars and standing on the pavement, and everyone looked where Edmund had pointed. The chairs were not all empty. At the head of the table, and in the two chairs beside it, there was something, or possibly three somethings. "What are those?" Lucy said in a whisper. "It looks like 3 beavers sitting at the table." "Or a huge bird's nest," said Edmund. "It looks more like a haystack to me," said Caspian. Reepicheep ran forward, jumped on a chair, and then onto the table, and ran along it, threading his way as nimbly as a dancer between the cups and the pyramids of fruit and the ivory salt cellars, and he ran right up to the mysterious gray mass at the end, peered and touched, and then called out. And this is what Reepicheep saw. We can't really tell much from that picture, can we? But anyway, that's what he saw. "These will not fight, I think," he said. Everyone else now came close and saw what sat in those 3 chairs was 3 men, although they were hard to recognize as men unless you looked very closely. Their hair, which was gray, had grown down over their eyes until it almost concealed their faces, and their beards had grown down over the table, climbing around and entwining the goblets and the plates, like brambles entwine a fence, until, all mixed with one great mat of hair, it flowed over the edge and down to the floor. And from their heads, the hair hung over the backs of their chairs, so that they were wholly hidden. In fact, the 3 men seemed to be nearly all hair. "Are they dead?" said Caspian. "I don't think so," said Reepicheep, lifting one of their hands out of its tangle of hair and into his 2 paws. "This one is warm, and his pulse is beating." "And this one too, and this one," said Drinian. "Well, then they're only asleep," said Eustace. "It's been a long sleep, though, for their hair to grow like this," said Edmund. "It must be an enchanted sleep," said Lucy. "I felt it the moment we landed on this island. It's full of magic. Do you think we have perhaps come here to break the magic?" "We could try," said Caspian, and began shaking the nearest of the 3 sleepers. For a moment everyone thought he was going to be successful, for the man breathed hard and muttered, "I'm going eastward no more. Let's set oars for Narnia." But he sank yet into an even deeper sleep, and his head sagged a few inches lower onto the table, despite their efforts to rouse him. It was useless. With the second one, it was just the same. "We weren't born to live like animals," he whispered. "Get to the east while you've got a chance. Land's behind the sun." And then he sank down. And the third one only said, "Mustard, please." And then he sank down. "Set our oars for Narnia, eh?" said Drinian. "Yes," said Caspian, "you are right, Drinian. I think our quest is at an end. Let's look at their rings. Ah, yes, these are their devices. This is the Lord Revilian, and this is the Lord Argos, and this one is Lord Mamravon." "But we can't wake them," said Lucy. "What are we to do?" "Begging your Majesty's pardons and all," said Rince, "but why not eat while you're discussing it? We don't see a dinner like this every day." "Not for your life," said Caspian. That's right, said several of the sailors. "Too much magic about here. The sooner we're back on board, the better." "Depend on it," said Reepicheep, "that it was from eating this food that these 3 lords came by a 7-year sleep." "I wouldn't touch it to save my life," said Drinian. "It's getting dark uncommonly quick," said Rhinelf. Back to the ship, muttered the men. "I really think they're right," said Edmund. "We can decide what to do with these 3 sleepers tomorrow. We dare not eat the food, and there's no sense in staying here all night. The whole place smells like magic and danger." "I am entirely of King Edmund's opinion," said Reepicheep, "as far as concerns the ship company in general, but I myself will sit here at the table until sunrise." "Why on earth?" said Eustace. "Because," said the mouse, "this is a very great adventure, and no danger seems to me so great as that of knowing that when I get back to Narnia, I left a mystery behind through fear." "I'll stay with you, Reep," said Edmund. "I will too," said Caspian. "And me," said Lucy. And then Eustace volunteered also. And this was very brave of him because, having never read of such things or ever heard of them since he joined the Dawn Treader, it made it worse for him than for the others. "I beseech your Majesty," said Drinian. "No, my lord," said Caspian, "your place is with the ship. And you have a hard day's work ahead of you, since we have five of us have been idle here." There was a lot of argument about this, but in the end, Caspian had his way. As the crew marched off to the shore in the gathering dust, none of the 5 watchers, except perhaps Reepicheep, could avoid a cold feeling in their stomachs. They took some time choosing their seats at the perilous table, and perhaps everyone had the same reason, but nobody said it out loud, for it was rather a nasty choice. One could hardly bear to sit all night next to those 3 terrible, hairy objects which, if not dead, were certainly not alive in the ordinary sense. On the other hand, to sit at the far end so that you could see them less and less as the night grew darker and wouldn't know if they were moving and perhaps wouldn't see them at all by about 2 o'clock, no, that was not to be thought of. So they sauntered around and around the table saying, "What about here?" Or perhaps a little further on, or how about on this side? Till at last they settled down somewhere about the middle, but nearer to the sleepers than to the other end. It was about 10 by now, and almost dark. Those strange new constellations burned in the east. Lucy would have liked it better if they had been the leopard and the ship and the other old friends of the Narnian sky. They wrapped themselves in their cloaks and sat still and waited. At first there was some attempt at talk, but it didn't come to much. And they sat, and they sat. And all the time they heard the waves breaking on the beach. After hours, that seemed like ages, there came a moment when they knew they had all been dozing off, but they were suddenly wide awake. The stars were all in quite different positions now. The sky was very black, except for the faintest possible gray in the east. They were cold, thirsty, and stiff. And none of them spoke, because now at last something was happening. Beyond them, beyond the pillars, there was the slope of a low hill. And now a door opened in the hillside, and a light appeared in the doorway. And a figure came out, and the door shut behind it. The figure carried a light, and this light was really all that they could see distinctly. It came slowly nearer and nearer, till at last it stood right at the table opposite them. Now they could see that it was a tall girl, dressed in a long, clear blue dress which left her arms bare. She was bareheaded, and her yellow hair hung down her back. And when they looked at her, they thought that they had never before known what real beauty was. The light which she had been carrying was a tall candle in a silver candlestick, which she now set upon the table. If there had been any kind of wind off the sea earlier in the night, it must have died down now, for the flame of that candle burned as straight and still as if it were a room with all the windows shut and the curtains drawn. Gold and silver on the table shone in its light. Lucy now noticed something lying lengthwise on the table which had escaped her attention before. It was a knife of stone, sharp as steel, a cruel-looking ancient thing. No one had yet spoken a word, and then, Reepicheep first and Caspian next, they all rose to their feet, because they felt that she was a great lady. "Travelers who have come far to Aslan's table," said the girl, "why do you not eat and drink?" "Madam," said Caspian, "we feared the food because we thought it had cast our friends into an enchanted sleep." "They have never tasted it," she said. "Please," said Lucy, "what happened to them?" "7 years ago," said the girl, "they came here in a ship whose sails were rags and her timbers were ready to fall apart. There were a few others with them, sailors, and when they came to this table, one of them said, 'Here's a good place. Let's set sail and reef sail and row no more, but sit down and end our days here in peace.' And the second said, 'No, let us re-embark our ship and sail back to Narnia. It may be that Miraz is dead.' But the third, who was a very masterful man, jumped to his feet and said, 'No, by heaven, we are men, and we are Telmarines, not brutes. What do we do but seek adventures after adventures? We have not long to live in any case. Let's spend what's left seeking the unpeopled world beyond the sunrise.' And as they quarreled, he caught up the knife of stone which lies there on the table, and would have fought with his friends. But it is a thing not right for him to touch, and as his fingers closed on the hilt of that stone knife, a deep sleep fell on all three. And until the enchantment is undone, they will never wake up." "What is this knife of stone?" said Eustace. "Do none of you know it?" said the girl. I think," said Lucy, I think I've seen something like it before. It was a knife like this that the White Witch used long ago when she killed Aslan at the stone table." "It was the same," said the girl, "and it was brought here to be kept in honor while the worlds last." Edmund, who had been looking more and more uncomfortable for the last few minutes, spoke now. "Look here," he said, "I hope I'm not a coward about eating this food, and I'm sure I don't mean to be rude, but we've had a lot of queer adventures on this voyage of ours, and things aren't always what they seem. When I look in your face, I can't help believing that everything that you say is true, but then that's just what happened with the witch, too. How are we to know that you are our friend?" "You can't know," said the girl. "You can only believe, or not." After a moment's pause, Reepicheep's small voice was heard. "Sire," he said to Caspian, "of your courtesy, fill my cup with wine from that flagon. It's too big for me to lift, and I will drink to the lady." Caspian obeyed the mouse. Standing on the table, he held up his golden cup between his tiny paws and said, "Lady, I pledge you." And then he started eating the cold peacock, and in a short time, everyone began to follow his example. Everyone was very hungry, and the meal, if not quite what you might want for breakfast, was excellent for a very late supper. "Why is it called Aslan's table?" said Lucy. "It is set here by his bidding," said the girl, "for those who come from far. Some call this island the world's end, for though you can sail further, this is the beginning of the end." "But how does the food keep?" said the practical Eustace. "It is eaten and renewed every day," said the girl. "This you will see." "And what are we to do about the sleepers?" said Caspian. In the world from which my friends come, and here he nodded at Eustace and the Pevensies, they have a story of a prince or a king coming to a castle where all the people lived in an enchanted sleep, and in this story he could not dissolve the enchantment until he had kissed the princess. But here, said the girl, it's different. Here he can't kiss the princess until he has dissolved the enchantment. Then, said Caspian, in the name of Aslan, show me how to set about that work at once. My father will teach you that, said the girl. Your father, said everyone. Where is he, and who is he? Look, said the girl, turning around and pointing at the door in the hillside. Did I show you the picture of Reepicheep holding the cup in his hand? I don't think I did. Here he is, drinking his toast to the queen. I pledge your lady, he said. Your father, said everyone. Who is he, and where? Look, said the girl, turning around and pointing at the door in the hillside. They could see it more easily now, for while they had been talking, the stars had grown fainter, and great gaps of white sky were appearing in the grayness of the eastern sky. What's going to come out of that doorway? Let's find out in chapter 14, the beginning of the end of the world. Slowly the door opened again, and out came a figure as tall, as straight as the girl, but not as slender. It carried no light, but light seemed to come from it. And as it came nearer, Lucy saw that it was like an old man. His silver beard came down to his bare feet in front, and his silver hair hung down to his bare feet and behind, and his robe appeared to be made from the fleece of silver sheep. He looked so mild and grave that once more all the travelers rose to their feet and stood in silence. But the old man came on without speaking to the travelers and stood on the other side of the table opposite his daughter. Then both of them held up their arms before them and turned to face the east. In that position, they began to sing. I wish I could write down the song, but no one who was present could remember it. Lucy said afterward that it was very high but very beautiful, a cold kind of song, an early morning kind of song. And as they sang, the gray clouds lifted from the eastern sky, and the white patches grew brighter and bigger, until all was white, and the sea began to shine like silver. And long afterwards, but the two were singing all the time, the east began to turn red, and at last, unclouded, the sun came up out of the sea, and its long, level rays shone down the length of the table on the gold and silver and the stone knife. Once or twice before, the Narnians had wondered whether the sun at its rising didn't look bigger in these seas than it had looked at home. This time they were certain. There was no mistaking it, and the brightness of its rays on the dew and on the table was far beyond any morning brightness they had ever seen. And as Edmund said afterwards, though lots of things happened on that trip which sound more exciting, that moment really was more exciting. For now they knew that they had truly come to the beginning of the end of the world. They saw something seemed to be flying at them out of the very center of the rising sun. But of course you couldn't look steadily in that direction, to be sure. But presently the air was full of voices, voices which took up the same song that the lady and her father were singing, but in far wilder tones and in a language that no one could understand. And soon after that, the owners of these voices could be seen. They were birds, large and white, and they came by the hundreds and thousands and lighted on everything, on the grass, the pavement, on the table, on your shoulders, your hands, your heads, until it looked like heavy snow had fallen. For, like the snow, they'd not only made everything white, but also blurred and blunted all the shapes. But Lucy, looking out from between the wings of the birds that covered her, saw one bird fly up to the old man with something in its beak that looked like a little fruit, unless it was a little live coal from a fire, which it might have been, for it was too bright to look at. and the bird laid it in the old man's mouth. Here's the bird coming with the bright little round thing, whatever it is, and he's going to put it in the old man's mouth. Then the birds stopped their singing and appeared to be very busy at the table. And when they rose from it, everything on the table that could be eaten or drunk had disappeared. Those birds rose from their meal in their thousands and hundreds and carried away all the things that couldn't be eaten or drunk, like bones and rinds and shells, and took their flight back to the rising sun. But now, because they weren't singing, the whir of their wings seemed to set the whole of the air a-tremble. And there at the table was pecked clean and empty, and the 3 old lords of Narnia were still fast asleep. And now at last the old man turned to the travelers and bade them welcome. "Sir," said Caspian, "will you tell us how to undo the enchantment which holds these 3 Narnian lords asleep?" "I will gladly tell you that, my son," said the old man. "To break this enchantment, you must sail to the world's end, or as near as you can to it, and you must come back having left at least one of your company behind." "And what must happen to that one?" asked Reepicheep. "He must go on to the utter east and never return to the world." "That is my heart's desire," said Reepicheep. "And are we near the world's end now, sire?" said Caspian. "Have you any knowledge of the seas and lands further east than this?" "I saw them long ago," said the old man, "but it was from a great height. I cannot tell you such things as sailors might need to know." "Do you mean you were flying in the air?" Eustace blurted out. "I was a long way above the air, my son," replied the old man. "I am Ramadou, but I see that you stare at one another and have not heard my name. And no wonder, for the days when I was a star have ceased long before any of you knew this world, and all the constellations have changed." "Golly," said Edmund under his breath, "he's a retired star." "Aren't you a star any longer?" said Lucy. "I am a star at rest, my daughter," answered Ramadou. "When I set for the last time, decrepit and old beyond all that you can reckon, I was carried to this island. I am not so old now as I was then. Every morning, a bird brings me a fireberry from the valleys of the sun, and each fireberry takes away a little of my age. And when I have become as young as the child that was born yesterday, I shall take to my rising again, for we are at the earth's eastern rim, and once more I will tread the great dance." "In our world," said Eustace, "a star is a huge ball of flaming gas." "Even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of. And in this world you have already met a star, for I think that you have been with Koryakin." "Is he a retired star too, said Lucy. "Well, not quite the same," said Ramadou. "It was not quite as a rest that he was sent to govern the Duffers. You might call it a punishment. He might have shone for thousands of years more in the southern winter sky if all had gone well." "What did he do, sire?" said Caspian. "My son," said Ramadou, "it is not for you, a son of Adam, to know what faults a star can commit. But come, we waste time with such talk. Are you yet resolved? Will you sail farther east and come again, leaving one to return no more, and so break the enchantment? Or will you sail westward?" "Surely, sire," said Reepicheep, "there is no question about that. It's plainly part of our quest to rescue these 3 lords from enchantment." "I think the same, Reepicheep," replied Caspian. "And even if it were not so, it would break my heart not to go as near to the world's end as Dawntreder will take us. But I'm thinking of the crew. They signed on to seek the 7 lords, not to reach the rim of the earth. If we sail east from here, we sail to find the edge, the utter east. And no one knows how far that is. They are brave fellows, but I see signs that some of them are weary with this voyage, and they long to have our prow pointed back to Narnia again. I don't think I can go any further without their knowledge and consent. And then there's poor Lord Roop. He is a broken man. My son, said the star, it would be no use, even if you wished it, to sail for the world's ends with men unwilling or deceived. That is now how great accomplishments are achieved. They must know where they go and why. But who is this broken man you speak of? And Caspian told Ramadou the story of Roop. I can give him what he needs most, said Ramadou. In this island there is sleep without stint or measure, and sleep in which no faint footfall of a dream ever was heard. Let him sit beside these other three and sleep until oblivion, until you return. Oh, let's do that, Caspian, said Lucy. I'm sure that's just what he would love. At that moment, they were interrupted by the sound of many feet and voices. Drenian and the rest of the ship's company were approaching. They halted in surprise when they saw Ramadou and his daughter. And then, because these were obviously great people, every man took off his hat. Some sailors eyed the empty dishes and flagons on the table with eyes filled with regret. My lord, said the king to Drenian, pray send 2 men back to the Dawn Treader with a message to Lord Roop. Tell him that the last of his old shipmates are here, asleep without any dreams, and that he can share it. When this had been done, Caspian told the rest of them to sit down and explain the whole situation to them. When he finished, there was a long silence and some whispering. But presently, the master bowman got to his feet and said, What some of us have been wanting to ask for a long time, Your Majesty, is whether we turn back here or somewhere else. It's been west and northwest winds all the way, barring an occasional calm. And if that doesn't change, I'd like to know what hopes we have to even see Narnia again. There's not much chance of supplies lasting while we row all that way. If the wind was blowing from the west and they wanted to sail west, obviously the wind would be against them and wouldn't fill their sail, and they couldn't sail against it. They'd have to row. That's landsman talk, said Drinian. There's always a prevailing west wind in these seas through the summer, and it always changes at the new year. We'll have plenty of wind for sailing westward, more than we should like from all accounts, after the new year. That's true, master, said an old sailor who was Galmian by birth. You get some ugly weather rolling up from the east in January and February, and by your leave, sire, if I was in command of this ship, I'd say, let's winter here and begin the voyage home in March. What would you eat while you were wintering here, said Eustace. Oh, this table, said Ramadou, will be filled with a king's feast every day at sunset. Now you're talking, said several sailors. Your majesties and gentlemen all, said Rhine-Elf, there's one thing I would like to say. There's not one of us chaps that was pressed into taking this journey. We're all volunteers. And there's some of us looking very hard at that table and thinking about king's feasts. And we were talking very loud about adventures on the day we sailed from Cair Paravel. And we swore that we wouldn't come back until we'd found of the end of the world. And there were some standing on the quay that day who would have given all they had to come with us. It was thought a finer thing to have been a cabin boy on the Dawn Treader than to wear a knight's belt. I don't know if you get the hang of what I'm trying to say, but what I mean is that I think chaps who sent out like us will look as silly as those dufflepuds if we came home and say that we got to the beginning of the world's end, but we didn't have the heart to go any further. Some of the sailors cheered at this, but some said that was all very well. This is not going to be much fun, whispered Edmund to Caspian. What are we to do if half the fellows hang back? Wait, said Caspian, whispering back. I've still got a card to play. Aren't you going to say anything, Reep? asked whispered Lucy. No, said, why should your majesty expect it? Answered Reepicheep. in a voice that most people heard. "My own plans are made. While I can, I will sail east in the Dawn Treader. When she stops, I will paddle east in my coracle. When she sinks, I shall swim east with my 4 paws. And when I can swim no longer, if I have not reached Aslan's country or shot over the edge of the world in some fast waterfall, I shall sink with my nose to the sunrise, and Peepaseek will be the head of the talking mice in Narnia." "Hear, hear," said a sailor. "I'll say the same," barring the bit about the coracle, which couldn't bear me. And then he added in a lower voice, "I'm not going to be outdone by a mouse." At this point, Caspian jumped to his feet. "Friends," he said, "I think you have not quite understood our purpose. You talk as if we had come to you with our hat in our hand, begging you for shipmates. It isn't like that at all. We and our royal brother and sister and their kinsman and Sir Reepicheep, the good knight, and the Lord Drinian have an errand to the world's edge. It is our pleasure to choose from you such as are willing to go of such a high honorable enterprise. We have not said that anyone can come for the asking. That is why we now command the Lord Drinian and Master Rinch to consider carefully which men among you are the hardest in battle, the most skilled seamen, the purest in blood, the most loyal to us, and to give their names to us in a schedule." And he paused and went on in a quicker's voice. "Aslan's mane!" he exclaimed. "Do you think that the privilege of seeing the last things is to be bought for a song? Why, every man that comes with us shall bequeath the title of Dawn Treader to all his descendants, and when we land on Caraparavel on our homeward voyage, he shall have either gold or land to make him rich for his whole life. Now, scatter over the island, all of you, and in half an hour I shall receive the names that Lord Drinian brings me." There was rather a sheepish silence, and then the crews made their bows and moved away, one in this direction and one in that, but mostly in little groups, talking. "And now for the Lord Roop," said Caspian. But turning to the head of the table, he saw that Roop was already there. He had arrived, silent and unnoticed, while the discussion was going on, and was seated beside Lord Argos. The daughter of Ramadou stood beside him, as she had just helped him to his chair, and Ramadou stood behind him and laid his hands on Roop's gray head, and even in the daylight, a faint silver light came from the star. There was a smile on Roop's haggard face. He held out one of his hands to Lucy and the other to Caspian, and for a moment it looked like he was going to say something. But then his smile brightened as if he was feeling a delicious sense of contentment come over him, and his head fell forward, and he slept. "Poor Roop," said Lucy. "I am glad. He must have had a terrible time." "Don't even let's think about it," said Eustace. Meanwhile, Caspian's speech, helped somewhat by the magic of this island, was just having the effect that he intended. A good many who had been anxious to get out of the voyage now felt quite differently about being left out of it. And of course, whenever one sailor commented that he has made up his mind to ask permission to sail, the others who hadn't said that that's just what they were going to do. And so before the half hour was up, over several people were positively sucking up to Drinian and Rince. At least that's what they called it at my school. Of course, Miss Peggy calls it being an obsequious sycophant. They all sucked up to Drinian and Rince to get a good report. And soon there were only 3 left who didn't want to go. And those 3 were trying very hard to persuade others to stay with them. And very shortly after that, there was only 1 left. And in the end, he began to be afraid of being left behind on his own and changed his mind. At the end of the half hour, they came trooping back to Aslan's table and stood at one end while Drinian and Rince went down and spoke with Caspian and made their report. And Caspian accepted all of them but the one who had changed his mind at the last moment. His name was Pittercream, and he stayed on the island of the Star all the time that the others were away looking at the world's end. And he very much wished that he had gone with them. He wasn't the sort of man who would enjoy talking to Ramadou or Ramadou's daughter, nor they to him. And it rained a good deal, and though there was a wonderful feast at the table every night, he didn't much enjoy it. He said it gave him the creeps, sitting there alone, and in the rain likely as not, with those 4 lords asleep at the other end of the table. And when the others returned, he felt so out of it that he deserted on the voyage home at the Lone Islands and went and lived in Kellerman, where he told wonderful stories about his adventures at the end of the world until at last he became to believe them himself. So you may say, in a sense, that he lived happily ever after, but he never could bear mice. That night, they all ate and drank together at the great magic table between the pillars where the feast was renewed. And the next morning, the Dawn Treader set sail once more, just when the great birds had come and gone again. "Lady," said Caspian, "I hope to speak with you again when I have broken the enchantments." And Ramadou's daughter looked at him and smiled. Ooh. Next time, we'll read the last 2 chapters of this book. Are you excited to read the last 2 chapters? I am, but I'm a little bit sad that it's going to be over. I do love this book. All right. Thanks for being with me. And I'll look forward to seeing you again. And we'll finish the last 2 chapters of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Bye for now.